I was in contact, and they contacted me because evidently something, and only they can tell you why, but the point being is that they got what they were looking for. And the general told me this. He said, Steve, we wanted two things, and we got it. We got it before anybody else got to it, okay? He told me, and these are the guys that operate beyond the regular military. They're beyond the NSA. They're beyond a lot of things, okay? But they wanted two things, Tom, and this is, you don't know, so I'll fill in the blank there. According to active duty, 4-star, the point is they got the DNA that they're looking for, but they also got the control mechanism and the power source to basically activate what most people have come to know as the Tower of Babel. God destroyed it, obviously, but the point is by confounding their language. But that which Saddam Hussein had was the primary reason that we went into Iraq. The ancient technology, and God bless all of you who are listening to this that have cosmic and magic clearance, the technology, the DNA. And when I say DNA, I'm not just talking about, DNA of the entities that they can reconstitute, et cetera, I'm talking about the formulas that you've referred to so many times in quoting the passage in concerning Nimrod, that he began to become a Gibborim. So I can only tell you, Tom, according to the sources I had, and they contacted me, and again, I want to share something real quick, and I'll turn it right back. The people that contact me for one reason. They say that because I've been telling people the truth. That may not go well with my critics. When I can check out a certain general through different ways, or a couple generals, and people say, well, you can't possibly know those guys. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I do. And so even from in the military community, now I'm not bragging, but what I'm saying, look at tonight. I have never talked to you, Tom Horn, about this incident. You have never talked to me about this incident. Yet tonight we're putting, two and two together. And see, it's kind of like, I would say this, it's a binary binding of truth for a single purpose, a single focus. If they've got that, they've got the technology of the ancients. You know how the Pentagon refers to these guys? He calls them the gods of the Sumerians, okay? The gods. Little g's. So the point is that the fallen angel technology, the fallen angel power sources, this is what the illuminated ones, the globalists, if you will, seek to, number one, control the world with, but they actually believe they can make war against God. So knowing that, the point is that it puts the whole battle of Armageddon, it puts the whole battle in the heavenlies. The book of Revelation talks about the devil and his angels fighting against God and his angels, and they get kicked out of heaven. This is, in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard Tom Horn lay out to you is another one of those seminal points. The seminal point in history, because there is no way we talked about this before the living God. There is no way I knew what he knew or saw what he saw, yet those things dovetail. So, Tom, I think that's fascinating. Let me give you another example. A guy named Brett, I sent this to you, Tom Horn. Brett, God bless you for listening. He sent me a book by Suetonius, and Chris, you're going to find this interesting. It's called The 12 Caesars, and it talked about Nero's craziness, and I'm quoting from page 236. I had never seen this in all the decades of research. He said this, Nero was eager, it is said, to get hold of a certain Egyptian, a sort of ogre who would eat raw flesh and practically anything else he was given. And Nero loved watching this ogre, a giant, flesh-eating giant, tear live men to pieces and then devour them. Kind of sounds like Tom Horn, Chris Putnam's trip to the to the desert Southwest, doesn't it?
Oh, I thought you was waiting on Chris to respond. Yeah. I don't want to hog the show. I'd like to listen to Chris.
Right. Well, go ahead, Chris. I'm just saying that it's fascinating, this thing about Nero. Everybody knows Nero was insane. He was also demon-possessed. He was probably, classically in history, one of the most evil personages ever detailed or born on the planet. But, again, the fascinating thing is that we're on the air tonight. The book by Suetonius, 12 Caesars, page 236. and Caesar would get, and an ogre, by the way, an ogre isn't like Shrek, you know. That's just the whole Hollywoodification of trying to make something very evil more palatable, just like Gremlins. So I'll give it to you, Chris, on your thoughts on that.
Okay, just on the concept of the ogre and Nero in the desert, or I wasn't sure where you wanted me to go with that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, you know, one thing that I uncovered, you know, you see a lot of criticism of these ideas that Tom and you guys and we're throwing out all together, especially about, you know, these beings, but they're absolutely biblical. When you look in these chapters in Isaiah that are about the day of the Lord and the sorts of things that are going to go on, in the original languages, it's not even controversial that it's talking about, if you look in the Septuagint version of the Bible, it very clearly says that giants are coming to execute my wrath. Now, you know, I don't think that you know, a Jew living 100 years before the birth of Jesus would have even thought that was controversial. They just kind of accepted that sort of thing. But it also talks about, you know, satyrs or half goat, half human hybrid beings that'll be dancing around, you know, during the destruction of Babylon. But this is really very clearly pointing to the day of the Lord, to the end times, you know, not an event that's ever happened before in history. So, you know, no matter, you know, how people want to interpret those passages, they cannot accuse us of being unbiblical by talking about them. You know, they might not like the way that we tie them to current events. They might not like the way we take it quite literally, but it is very much biblical. And, you know, there's, you know, their interpretation is their interpretation. If they want to turn it into some sort of symbolic language that has no tangible meaning, that is, you know, something they can choose to do. But I take it very seriously, and I think people should, you know, be watching for these sorts of things. And I think that, you know, recent events support that they're actually happening, and it's foolish to ignore it. So that's really the perspective that we're putting out here. And so the fact that, you know, you're releasing a book about, you know, the gates of hell being open and creatures coming over, I think it is a warning to the church. You know, your kids are out there joining ghost hunting societies and occult clubs, going and trying to bring up spirits using electronics, trying to capture their voices, using little machines and stuff on television to try to detect ghosts. This is what the children in America are doing right now, the stuff that the Bible warns against very specifically, and says that, you know, you put yourself under the influence of demons by doing this stuff. So the fact that we're talking about this stuff and warning people about it, we need to even say it louder, and I don't care about what the critics think. We really need to wake people up because this is happening. The paradigm is shifting. The world is changing. The occult is becoming more in your face. And the fact that, you know, the atheism movement is dying because people are seeing all this spiritual movement. And it's time for the church to wake up and start addressing this stuff. And I'm just really honored to be, you know, in a place with you and Tom where we can function in that role.
Absolutely. And hey, Steve, if I can, you know, what Chris is talking about with, you know, the kids are out there right now, and they're being lured into learning how to open their own gates. It's fun, right? Get some electronic equipment and go ghost hunting and open a doorway and communicate with spirits. And then you mentioning that Nero, did you say Nero? Anyway, has an ogre.
Yes, Nero. Yep.
And he's got this ogre, and he likes watching him be cannibalistic.
Tearing people literally live apart in front of him and then eating them, and that really caused, I guess, some perverted response in Nero, but that was his favorite thing. And again, you see, Tom, I didn't know Brett. Brett is one of our listeners, and God bless you, Brett. The bottom line is he sends me this, I think today, okay, when I forwarded it to you today, and the point being is it ties in exactly with what Dr. Mose told you. Did it not? I mean, will you share, because this is something that, I'm sorry, I'm excited now. Will you share what, you know, I I get really, this is like candy for me, ear candy. The point being is that again, I started the show with saying that classic archaeology, classic, historians just denied cannibalism in the desert Southwest, blah, blah, blah. And now you hear the story about literally men being torn apart, and you're hearing this from Native Americans. By the way, Native Americans know who tells the truth and who doesn't. Just look at the history of the United States government and the way they've treated them, I mean, I'm sorry, but, I'm blunt. The point being is that this is will you share that? Because I think here's what I'm trying to get people to understand. The thing is that we've already been prepared to be turned into a food source, Soylent Green, the Twilight Zone to serve man, the Outer Limits episodes, this thing is predictable in the genre of cinema. Chris is talking about kids. Look at the goths. Look at the vampirism, drinking blood. Look at the combination, of humans, not human, forgive me, perverted sexuality and its association with death. So the point being is that when you're in the desert Southwest and you're hearing this, and again, I'm going back even deeper into ancient history due to the Woods document that's in my new book, the revision of Genesis 6, the second volume, which has got 165 new photos. I'm telling you that there's a reason. There's a reason. It's fascinating. Chris Putnam, Steve Quayle, Tom Horn are right back at the Tower of Babel, or Babel. Some people pronounce it one way, some pronounce it the other. But the point is that now there's nothing new under the sun, Chris Putnam. We're that which was is going to be again. So Tom, share the cannibalism thing. The reason I'm focusing on this is because it's critical and it explains what happens to civilizations that embrace this. Literally, they're not good to the very last man. They devour each other to the very last man, who then ultimately.
Here's the thing. We go to Mount Graham, we come down off Mount Graham, we get this information from the Anasazi, we realize that there's something more here that we haven't thoroughly investigated. We're Americans, we grew up in this country, and all of a sudden our eyes are being opened to information about the ancient American history that we are unfamiliar with, and so we decide to investigate it. So while Chris is just returning from Sedona, Arizona, and capturing film of light beings that are coming out of a portal, essentially warning him not to come any closer, I think, and being buzzed by V-shaped craft. I'm getting in a rig, heading out with a film crew for the four corners of the United States. Now, we go into all of the details about that in the book, On the Path of the Immortals, so I won't take time to tell it all, but here's this one part you're asking me to tell you. We had tried to get authorities from within the Native American nations, whether it be Apache, Hopi, Navajo, whatever, to sit down with us. We're talking elders, people who are leaders in the nations, and they're very suspicious. They don't like to talk to white people because, too many times New Agers have taken their information and then went out and misused it. And so they're very suspicious. So we were working a year and a half, trying. Finally, bottom line is we get to sit down with the third generation, the Navajo Nation's medicine man. He's an academic. He's written books that they use in their universities and schools. And we meet him actually on the campus of the school. We go into a traditional hogan, and we didn't tell him we was going to film him. And when we get there, he's willing to meet with us. We go inside the hogan. Our cameraman comes in. He sees the camera. He doesn't like the camera, but he doesn't stop us. And so we actually filmed 3 hours of Dr. Don Mose, he's a famous person in the Navajo Nation. And one of the books, I don't know if I showed it to you when you were here, but one of the books that he wrote, he had an artist depict some of the giants that were alive and that the Indians had to fight against cannibalistic giants here in the U.S. in early times. But anyway, we sat down, and here's the point I want to make. He starts telling us, because I asked him, tell me, what happened to the Anasazi? This is a giant mystery. Where did these pre-Pueblo Indians that built these magnificent cliff dwellings in the Four Corners area of the United States. Where did they go? They disappeared literally overnight. Nobody knows where they went, and the universities admit that. Now they have theories, and they say that, you know, there could have been like a drought, and so they migrated away. And so I asked him to tell me what happened to the Anasazi. And so we sit down, and he starts giving me the traditional story that they might tell to, you know, any other white person about a 7-year drought. They migrated away. They eventually became a different people, maybe the Hopi, whatever. And so he's talking, and I stopped him. And I said, now, I understand there's really a lot of evidence that suggests that that's not what happened with the Anasazi, that something else happened. And we've got this on film. And, oh, by the way, we're giving away, it's not available to the public anywhere. So I asked him what happened to the Anasazi. He says, he starts telling the story. And when I question it, he stops. And this is the part, Steve, that got me. He looks right into the camera, and people will see this. And he says, and he smiles, actually. And he says, well, I shouldn't tell you this, but... And I have no idea why this man went off record and told this story. But for the next hour, he tells us a different story. He says, if you would have asked my great-grandfather, who was also a Navajo Nation medicine man, here's the story that he would have told. And, brother, he starts describing a moment in early American history where a portal opens in the Four Corners area of the United States of America, and a reptilian, a deceiver, comes through the portal. Same story, almost identical to what the Apache talk about. And he starts deceiving the people. He starts teaching them sorcery, magical incantations. They go inside their kivas. They start practicing pharmakia. They open doorways. Giants come through and start cannibalizing, eating the people, teaching the people who are with them. They get like, here's the crazy part of this, Steve, they get like some of the Anasazi that are willing to be their guides, right, because they're trying to survive, to help them track down where other Anasazi are so they can eat them. They become cannibalistic. Now, here's something I want to tell you. This investigation continues right up until this very moment. I haven't stopped. Allie Anderson, who's a private investigator that works for me full-time, came on staff this last year. And I told her, I want to know the deepest parts. I don't want to stop just because a book's written. I want to know the deepest parts of the storyline. She just yesterday gave me a 50-page report that is, it's just absolutely unbelievable. It is literally evidence at the university level here in the United States of Nephilim, probably human breeding, if you will, or raping Anasazi and the offspring. Now listen, this 50-page report is based on archaeological digs that universities here in the United States conducted under the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center of excavations in southwestern Colorado. Some of this information is actually available online. You could read it online. If you read it, here's what you'll find. You'll find out that they found, in their excavations, they found locations where the Anasazi were literally ripped to shreds. Now, I'm not talking about somebody got killed, beaten in the head with a hammer, and burned in a fire and ate. I mean, literally, the flesh and bone is ripped to shreds, as if they had been torn apart, Steve, like this ogre you was talking about a moment ago. This is in the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center excavation, southwestern Colorado, university-level excavations that were done here in the U.S. Secondly, they found where the bones of some of those who had been ripped to shreds were scattered over a very large region, as if something had torn them up, almost, it sounds terrible, almost like packing them for food, almost like carrying them like they're you know, like the Indians would, you know, make jerky or something and carry that over long distances, because the bones of an individual would be found many, many miles away, another bone that relates to that individual. Thirdly, and this is where it gets really weird, they uncovered remains of what they're calling Anasazi Indians, but they're larger than all of the other Anasazi Indians. They have mutated mandibles. They have sharp teeth, almost like an animal, and they have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And immediately when I'm reading this report that again is done at the university level here in the U.S., having to do with excavations among the Anasazi, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this sounds so much like the Middle East. These women were literally raped by the Nephilim, if you will. They gave birth to Gibborim. This is the story it tells in the Middle East, but now we're talking about here in the United States. And these date to exactly the same period in time that the Old Testament Bible tells us this was happening over there. So,
hey, yeah, I could add just a detail to that. I mean, one of the reasons that we can be really confident that there was cannibalism going on is that archaeologists have absolutely discovered petrified human dung, human waste. But within that human waste, they found that there was human DNA, which pretty decisively shows that they were eating humans. So the story about the reptilian coming through the portal actually starts to take on more weight, considering the archaeological evidence actually supports it better than the story that they just kind of dispersed and became other tribes.
Absolutely. So we found evidence that was not just somebody's opinion. It's not just an old Indian somewhere that wants to tell us stories. These are academics. They're very well respected. Their works, their books are used inside the indigenous schools, Navajo, Hopi, and so on schools. And they're oral historians, so they pass this down orally. In fact, it's very interesting being in a Hogan and having a third-generation medicine man tell us these stories. And in fact, he told us that when the missionaries came to the United States, the first missionaries, the Mexican invaders and so on, came here and started telling the indigenous people their stories to try to convert them to Christianity. Many did convert to Christianity. But he said, our forefathers told him, we already know these stories. We already know that God created, that a reptilian fell, came to the earth, deceived mankind, giant cannibalistic beings came onto the surface of the earth, God wiped them out in the flood, and after the flood they came back not in the same numbers as they were before. He said, we already know this to be true. We lived it. It happened here at the same time that it was happening in the Middle East. And so that was the extraordinary thing that we found. But, of course, now the question is, they came once. There's universal evidence that it did, in fact, happen. But now the question becomes, is it going to happen again? And that's the part that actually ties into biblical prophecy, end times prophecy. And that's what we try to do in this new investigation on the path of the immortals. And Chris did some research in there that is absolutely some of my absolute favorite stuff I've read in a very, very long time, where he talks about the fiery flying seraphim. And I don't know that we'll talk about that tonight, but just so people will know, when they get the book and they talk, and you see the biblical evidence, the Hebrew evidence, even the Dead Sea Scrolls that also describe these creatures that came through as having a reptilian presence. The fact that that is corroborated in scholarly works is just wonderful. It's fabulous.